Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at some anticipated releases for both the months of November and December, and these are going to specifically be for fantasy. I do tend to prefer doing a single month at a time, but at the end of the year there's not as many releases, so I'm just going to go ahead and combine November and December. There's a couple of books on this list that are sequels, and I'm going to get those out of the way first. Usually I go in order of release date, which I will do for the other works, but I'm going to start with the sequels, get those out of the way, and then we'll jump into the ones that maybe are not as known. But the first one, I mean, everybody knows. I feel like even if you're not a Storm My Archive fan, you know from all of the obnoxious Storm My Archive fans that Wind and Truth is coming out on December 10th. You've heard about it. There's a ton of videos out there. People have been doing their rereads. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about it. I actually do plan on doing another From Readers specifically about fandom, so be on the lookout in the future for a community tab post and a Patreon post if you want to chime in a conversation about the pros and the cons of fandom culture. But anyway, point is, Wind and Truth is coming out on December 10th. I am very excited. I'm not going to read the synopsis because this is one that it's the fifth in a series, so there's not really a whole lot that can be said without going into spoiler territory. I am curious though, for those of you that are also Storm My Archive fans and have read the synopsis, is anybody else a little nervous? I mean, I think a lot of us are nervous just from the standpoint of, oh my gosh, it's the conclusion to this arc for a series that so many of us really love, which is just already kind of nerve-wracking because you really want that landing to stick. But for an additional reason, I'm nervous, which is that when I saw the synopsis, I was like, that's a lot going on. And I know it's the longest Storm My Archive book to date, which I was like, of course it is. It's not enough to be like 1,000 pages, 1,200 pages. It's got to be even longer. At the very least, the audiobook, I believe, has clocked in at a longer amount than any of the previous ones. So I know there's going to be a lot of time to develop everything that is alluded to in the synopsis, but I'm like, but there's so much in that synopsis that I'm like, do we have the time for it all? Anyway, I think it's just because I'm just so scared of, I'm just nervous, you know? That's how I feel a lot of us get when we're coming up on the end of a series. If you are somebody that wants a refresher, maybe you don't have time to do a reread and you feel like you're mostly caught up, but you want maybe a couple of things brought up again, I did do entire dedicated videos to each of the books in the main Cosmere entries, and I have a whole playlist of things dedicated to Stormlight, to the Cosmere, so I'll have those things in the description bar down below if you'd like to check them out. And then also on World Hoppers, my collaborative channel where all the AdSense and merch sales goes to charity, recently did a video talking about some theories and predictions, so that'll be available as well. Those were so fun. So definitely check that out if you would like to chime in on some very potentially likely things that might occur, and then also some things that almost 100% are not going to happen. But anyway, moving into finally a different book. Again, keeping with sequels, the next one would be Glow of the Everflame, and this is the sequel to Spark of the Everflame. I've mentioned that I believe this was previously self-published, and I think the second book, Glow of the Everflame, which is the one I'm referring to, was already out, and then I think that it's been pulled because it was now picked up by a traditional publisher and is going to be redone. And then now if you look at it, there's a pre-order date, and that pre-order date happens to be December 3rd. So I think that this one, some of you may have even read it, but if you're looking to get into this series, the first one is already out, and the second one will be available on December 3rd. If you're interested in hearing more about this one, I did mention it in a couple different videos. I did a self-pub wrap-up, and then also, even though it's a lot longer and I talk about a lot of other books, the A Fantasy Fan Tries Fantasy Romance video, I talked about it there as well. If it is something that sparks your interest, I'll have those videos linked. I am actually going to read the synopsis for the first book for this next one, because I don't typically mention books I haven't read yet, the sequels to books I haven't read, because I can't really provide a whole lot of details. However, I'm making an exception for this one because it's a duology, and so the second book is going to mark the end of the series, which I know for a lot of people, they don't want to start series unless there is an end in sight. So there is going to be an end in sight, but more of the reason I'm talking about this is I think this author is incredibly underhyped, and that would be Jen Williams, and you may recognize that name because it is the author of the Winnowing Flame trilogy, which I have hyped up many a time. I love that series. It still breaks my heart a little bit that it is still so underhyped, but I really think it's so different than what you find in a lot of other fantasy. It's epic fantasy, and it does really interesting twists on some familiar character races and archetypes. It's so fun, it's so unique, it's so weird. It's also kind of like a sci-fantasy blend, which I love. But this other duology of hers is called the Talon duology, and the first book is Talons Sister, which is the one I'll read the synopsis for, and the second book is coming out, is going to be released on November 26th, so I just want to give people that heads up. And the first book, though, Talons Sister, the synopsis for this says, Levin has no memory of her life before she was a soldier. The process of turning her into a herald, a magic-killing machine, was traumatic enough that it wiped her mind clean. Now, with the war won and the Imperium satisfied, she finds herself unemployed and facing a bleak future. Her fellow heralds are disappearing, and her own mind seems to be coming apart at the seams. Strange visions, memories she shouldn't have, are resurfacing, and none of them make any sense. They show her Brittletane, the ancient and mysterious island that the Imperium was never able to tame. Levin resolves to go to this place of magic and warring queens with the hope of finding who she really is. Envoy Cato has done a number of important little jobs for the Imperium, most of them nasty, all of them in the shadows. His newest assignment is to escort the bone crafter Ganid Tyle as she travels across the Imperium. As the woman responsible for creating the heralds, his employers owe her a great deal. But Tyle's ambition alarms even Cato, and her conviction that she has found a new source of Titan bones buried deep in the earth could lead to another even bloodier war. Yanis was raised by griffins and has never seen another human face. The griffins fiercely protect their isolation. The piles of skulls that litter the mountains of Brittletane are testament to that, but the magic they guard will always make them a target for the greed of men. By choosing not to kill Yanis when she was just a baby, the griffins may have doomed themselves because the girl's past is coming for her and it carries a lethal blade. Definitely sounds so different. Once again, similar to Winnowing Flame, doesn't really sound like anything else. The comp titles are Andrea Stewart and John Gwynn, and I'm like, I mean, maybe. I don't know. Possibly. I definitely feel like the comp titles for Winnowing Flame weren't accurate at all. I think it was like Jay Kristoff and Robin Hobb, and I'm like, no, it's not. So I do feel like it's hard to pin down because her works tend to be like nothing else. But I do want to read that first book, and then once the second one's out, hopefully give that a go. I don't know if I'll be able to get around to it in November and December, just because I have a lot of other things I'll probably try to read before the end of the year. But if not at the end of this year, then hopefully early next year. Fingers crossed, because I do really want to read this duology. And once again, it has really high ratings, but so few ratings. The average rating for this is at 4.3, but there's only a little over 380 ratings for it. So I'm like, I just feel like she actually brings to the table so much of what so many of us want in our fantasy, and yet continues to be underhyped. But anyway, that's it for the ones that are somewhat related to sequels in some fashion or are just sequels. Now jumping into the other ones that are first in series. The first book is going to be Traitor Son. It says, in a land ravaged by war, a knight's promise and a princess's secret might raise a new dynasty or topple an empire. Remen of Andalin promised his knights that he would build them a good place, far from the carnage of war and the poisonous intrigues of the empire. But the only thing more difficult than winning a war is securing the peace. The Andalin devils dare even the sacred soil of the empire, and it takes all of Remen's military genius to keep his people alive. Yet even in the face of bandits, traitors, and the implacable hatred of the emperor, the greatest danger to Remen might be his new wife. Princess Ophelia Agniphis, daughter of the stars, the exiled princess. She is also the daughter of the divine emperor that executed Remen's family. Raised in a distant prison and given in place of her sister as Remen's reward for victory, Ophelia carries a secret that could topple the empire. His family was innocent, but will she risk her life to reveal the depth of her family's dishonor? I think this reminds me a little bit in its synopsis of Bridge Kingdom, which is fantasy romance. This sounds certainly like it's leaning into fantasy romance territory. It is the first book in a series, and it is categorized as science fiction and fantasy and as romance, so I think that means fantasy romance, because I don't think NetGalley has currently a fantasy romance specific categorization, but it definitely seems like maybe it's going to be political fantasy romance. And that one is scheduled for release on the 1st, which will be right around when this video goes up, I believe. After that, we have The Teller of Small Fortunes. This one looks to be a new cozy fantasy. It says, Tao is an immigrant fortune teller traveling between villages with just her trusty mule for company. She only tells small fortunes, whether it will hail next week, which boy the barmaid will kiss, when the cow will calve. She knows from bitter experience that big fortunes come with big consequences. Even if it's a lonely life, it's better than the one she left behind, but a small fortune unexpectedly becomes something more when a semi-reformed thief and an ex-mercenary recruit her into their desperate search for a lost child. Soon, they're joined by a baker with a need for adventure, and of course, a slightly magical cat. Tao starts down a new path with companions as big-hearted as her fortunes are small. But as she lowers her walls, the shadows of her past close in, and she'll have to decide whether to risk everything to preserve the family she never thought she could have. So yeah, it sounds very much like cozy fantasy, and I have seen that the Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches and Travis Baldry's works are comp titles for this one, which also those happen to be cozy fantasy. And it seems like there are definitely going to be themes of found family. It does seem like it is more contained and has the cute factor to the nth degree. So I am looking forward to that one, and it is scheduled to be released on the 5th. Next up, we have one that I'm not gonna lie, this cover is definitely piquing my interest, but the synopsis as well. So the title is The Great Library of Tomorrow, and the description says, The Great Library of Tomorrow is a stunningly original epic fantasy about a band of heroes who must defeat a malevolent enemy who is bent on destroying the openness, love, and creativity that sustain their many realms. Helia has served as a sage of hope for the Great Library of Tomorrow for centuries. She is one of the chosen few who embody and protect the values of humanity across the numerous realms of Paper World, which are connected within the library itself via magical portals controlled by the Book of Wisdom. But even her hope is tested when she and her partner Xavier, the Sage of Truth, are attacked while visiting the famous Rose Garden in the realm of Silvira. Wounded and in shock amidst a storm of fire, they are confronted by a deadly figure known to them as the Ash Man. With the garden destroyed and its dragon protector missing, Xavier sacrifices his life so that Helia can return home to warn the other sages. But there she finds the Book of Wisdom, always a guide to the sages, eerily silent. With the Ashman gaining strength, Helia soon finds herself in a race against time, searching for clues to the origins of her foe and any possible way to defeat him. And then the comm titles for this one are The City We Became and Mistborn. So I'm like, okay. Yeah, I guess so. We'll see. It sounds very interesting. Next up, we have The Serpent and the Wolf. The description for this one says, All her life, Vasa Khazar has been sharpened into a blade. After losing her mother, her only remaining parent, to mysterious dark magic that has since awakened within her, Vasa is certain death looms. So is her merciless brother, who aims to eliminate Vasa as a threat to his own crown. In one last political scheme, he marries her off to Reed of Marais, the ruthless foreign ruler, in hopes that he can use her death as a rallying cry to finally invade Reed's nation. All Vasa has to do is die, but she is desperate to live. Vasa enters her new marriage with every intent to escape it, wielding the hard-won political prowess and combat abilities her late father instilled in her. But to her surprise, Reed offers her a deal. Help him win the votes to rise in power and she can walk free. In exchange, he will share his knowledge about the dark magic running through her veins and help keep it at bay. This proposal may be too good to refuse, yet Vasa and Reed's undeniable attraction threatens to break the rules of their arrangement. As her brother's lethal machinations take form, everything is at stake. Vasa must learn to trust her new husband, but how can she, especially when their perfect political marriage begins to feel like the real thing? So once again, seems like a fantasy romance, but specifically a political fantasy romance. And I tend to think that there's a lot more intrigue in those kinds of stories. So I'll be curious to see what I end up thinking of that one. Anyway, that's it for some anticipated releases for both November and December. I will have links to everything in the description bar down below, and then also some of the projected release dates in case you like to reference back to those. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.